perfectionism is actually correlated with not success.
Oh, yeah.
Because the fear of failure keeps us from actually stepping out, keeps us from playing the game.
Yeah, I think it often, it keeps us sidelined. We don't launch until it's too late.
Hey everybody, and welcome to Epic Everyday, our weekday podcast for busy, stressed out Christians who don't want to just survive and instead really want to find freedom and abundance and peace. I'm Liz Frericks, and this is my husband, Evan.
Hi there.
And we're so glad you guys are here with us today.
Yeah, happy Wednesday, and welcome to our week on vulnerability armor.
Yes, or way to come back if you've been here before.
Oh, yeah.
Do you forget what Wednesday?
Do you usually welcome at the beginning? And you don't welcome somebody in the middle of like a movie or a play or something? You do it at the beginning?
Weirdly enough, yes. I typically do welcome people at the beginning. Anyway, so since it's Wednesday, we are talking about being centered. Being centered is living out of the essence of who God designed us to be.
Yeah. Like
you individually, me individually, our listeners individually. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm not trying to live to be like the way God designed my sister to be, like being myself.
We want to stop comparing. And inevitably on Wednesdays, we end up talking a lot about shame because when we have these false definitions of who we are and we start living that way, we get into big trouble.
So today, in keeping with the vulnerability armor from Brene Brown's Daring Greatly, we're going to talk about perfectionism.
Yeah. She
has a great definition of perfectionism. As a perfectionist myself, it was a little bit like, oh, that was a stab to the heart, man. It's the belief system that says, if I look perfect and do everything perfectly, I can avoid or minimize the painful feelings of shame, judgment, and blame. A little bit of an ouch there.
Yeah. What was the last part again?
I can avoid or minimize the painful feelings of shame, judgment, and blame.
And I don't think I struggled so much with having to be perfect, but that last part, or that somewhere in there, it was talking about concealing, where you want to be perfect. And I think I am I just want to conceal my faults,
Uh-huh.
But it's the same kind of thing. You're trying to avoid shame and judgment.
Yeah.
And so we either are perfect, or as close to as, and that's where we spend all of our energy trying to be perfect.
Well, and, it's such a trap because you can't be perfect.
That's right.
Like, we're human. We can't be perfect. But somehow, like we were talking about yesterday with that idea that if I were smarter, stronger, or better, I could handle this. When we fail, then it turns into, well, it's because I wasn't good enough. Whether we experience shame or blame or judgment, we tie our self-worth into accomplishment so we can earn other people's approval. And then if we don't get approval, instead of saying, well, that's their problem, so that's my problem.
Yeah. I should have done better. Should have done this.
Right.
Woulda, shoulda, coulda is a huge, messy mess to be in.
And so easy to get trapped in. Maybe that's just being a type 4, or it could be the way I was raised, but yeah, perfectionism is that's been a huge struggle for me. I was, the kid that always had, I'm the Hermione,
Definitely.
Had to have over 100 on every test. No hundreds.
Yeah.
Just 110.
I remember,
nothing.
Yeah. I remember in college, we were long distance dating and talking about how school was going. And so I'm not really a perfectionist. Like I said, I wouldn't have concealed my faults because there are many. But so I'm no stranger to getting a bad report card. And I remember talking to Liz and she said, I'm failing some class. And I was empathetic, of course, because I was being a good boyfriend. And I was like, oh boy, that sounds awful. But then it turns out that you're getting a B.
That's a failure right there.
Whereas I'd actually failed a class with an actual. And it wasn't until this last year or so that you realized that when I said I failed, I actually meant I got an F. You didn't realize that meant I actually got an F on my report card.
I was like, wait, you mean you failed the class?
Like people really get Fs?
Yeah, not in my realm of experience.
Well, you married the right person. So anyway, just an example of that. But.
Yeah. I think we get, especially women, I think get sucked into this idea that we have to look perfect on the outside. Our houses need to be clean. Our kids need to look a certain way. And
I think guys do it too. I mean, they need to have the right career. They need to have the right car, the right girl,
right.
enough money. I don't know. I mean, it's a trap for everybody. Mm-hmm. I was thinking of kind of I don't know where this quote is, but I've heard Casey Neistat say this quote, and I think it's from a book, that great is the enemy of good enough. Isn't that so anyway, he's kind of the king of good enough, I think. Is that in Brene Brown's book?
Yeah, let's see. Who is it? Voltaire.
Whoa. Is that the actual quote?
It says, don't let perfect be the enemy of the good.
Yeah. So Casey Neistat, he's on YouTube. He's kind of the king of good enough, I think. Like he's a utilitarian. I think that's why I like him, because it's like, it just works. It's not, and he likes to tell stories and make movies, and who cares if the lighting's perfect as long as the story's good. It's kind of his thing,
That is so hard for me. Yeah. I want to be there, but that is so hard for me because I do struggle with this, that, if I don't know, when she had that little thing about how it's to avoid shame, blame, and judgment, I was like, oh man, that I can totally see that, because I've never really thought about it that way. I'm just like, well, if I'm perfect, then I'll succeed.
Yeah, we're not
rather than recognizing, oh, well, it's because I, first of all, have the wrong definition of success. Because it was so interesting. She was talking about how this is not it's not a key to success. That perfectionism is actually correlated with not success.
Oh, yeah.
Because the fear of failure keeps us from actually stepping out, keeps us from playing the game.
Yeah, I think it often, it keeps us sidelined. We don't launch until it's too late.
Right, exactly.
There's some other business thing or class that we watch
where
it's
if you're not embarrassed about what your
first
put
product
out, then you didn't put it out soon enough.
Yeah. Yeah, you weren't actually doing it. You were, I get caught up with that. We waited too long to put our podcast out. We just kind of thinking about it and planning it, sort of, but mostly just kind of thinking about it and not actually doing it. We need that to be in the discomfort zone, I think.
Right.
Because that's vulnerability then, isn't it? To be like, this is my thing, whatever it is. And then people are like, that's not perfect. I'm like, well, okay, but
good.
I'm going to make it better, Whereas if you wait till it's perfect, it's too late.
Yeah.
I thought that was a really interesting idea. I think this comes up for me, playing music, like, since it's one of my passions, and like, you don't want to mess up in music, right? Because you're often performing. And so I don't know, but it's hard to call it perfection, but it's got to be good enough, right?
Right.
But I guess for me, like, I feel like I've had this thing lately where when I mess up, because I always do, instead of shaming myself, just trying to be like, well, I dropped my sticks. Here let's just keep going,
Right.
So trying to notice that in myself, that even though I don't want it to be perfect, I don't want there to be any mess ups like this. And maybe that's not very different, but it's slightly, but it's for the same reasons. I'm trying to avoid judgment and shame and whatever. You're still playing music. It's still pretty awesome. And it's still part of my calling, and it's still really fun. And you're with people like we've been talking about. Gratitude this week is the antidote to a lot of these things. Like, it's still pretty darn good.
Yeah, I agree. Brene Brown quotes Dr. Kristen Neff, who is a researcher and professor at the University of Texas at Austin, and she runs the Self-Compassion Research Lab. And she talked about 3 different ways to get out of perfectionism, and one of them is self-kindness. Like you were talking about, just saying to yourself, well, I dropped the sticks and now I'm moving on.
Now I'll pick up the sticks.
Self-criticism.
Right.
Yeah. And I think it's so easy to get caught in that, I'm so dumb, which, kind of leads into the shaming.
Oh, yeah.
And even we shame and blame ourselves way more than anybody else. Mm-hmm. Half the things that I say to myself, no one would say to me, you know?
Right.
Even internet trolls. So yeah, being able to recognize, okay, we need to not treat ourselves that way. We need to give ourselves kindness. And then recognizing, common humanity, that we're all broken, we all make mistakes, and kind of connecting with that idea, using our failures as a way to be more connected rather than isolated. And then the third thing she talks about is mindfulness, because, we don't want to ignore our negative feelings, but we don't want to play them up either. We just want to accept them, feel them, move on. Like we were talking about yesterday, feel your feelings.
Yeah.
And if we don't go through the process of actually feeling them, then we'll stay stuck in perfectionism. Because one of the main reasons perfectionism is such a trap is because, every failure you have reinforces your belief that if you were perfect, you wouldn't have the shame, blame, judgment.
Yeah.
Instead of recognizing that, failure means that you tried, and that's success.
Yeah, and perfectionism is, I think, pretty subjective to like what, if you did something perfect, some other person would be like, no, you didn't do that right. This way that I do it, it's better.
Right.
And so it's everybody's, so there's no way to win. Because even if I please myself 100%, somebody's not going to be happy. But often it's us dealing out the shame and recognizing that we weren't perfect. But even if we were, it wouldn't be good enough. So we got to let it go.
Yeah, that's hard. But definitely changing our inner monologue so that we're being kind with ourselves is huge. All right. Well, we love you guys and we're praying for you. Thanks to everybody that's been sharing the show and listening to the show. We really appreciate it. If you have found this podcast helpful, please do continue to share it. As always, pick whether today is going to be awesome, whether you're going to work on creating neural pathways for seeing the positive or the negative.
Yep. And tomorrow, the vulnerability armor we're going to talk about is oversharing. So do you know somebody who shares something so outrageously personal that it actually shuts down communication somehow?
Yeah.
It actually is an interesting kind of a shield to use.
Yep.
And so we're going to get into that tomorrow.
All right. Have an awesome day.
See ya.